The sky over every city on Earth changed at the same exact moment. 1 second it was the familiar blue or black or cloudy gray. The next, it was a shimmering, pale gold. The light was soft but everywhere, with no visible source. Cast no shadows. All noise, the traffic, the birds, the wind, seemed to fade into a deep, waiting silence. In the control room of the Mauna Kea Observatory in Hawaii, Min stared at the bank of dead monitors. Every single instrument pointed at the sky had gone dark at once. The global network feeds on the wall screens showed the same golden glow over Seoul, over Paris, over Nairobi. The room was full of scientists, all frozen, holding their breath. Then, a form took shape in the center of the golden light above every city. It was not quite solid, made of shifting bands of luminance that suggested a tall, gentle figure. A voice spoke. It was not loud, but it was inside every person's mind, clear and calm in their own language. It carried a feeling of deep, sorrowful kindness. People of Earth, the voice began. The being called itself Lumine, an emissary of the Galactic Accord. Min listened, his knuckles white where he gripped the back of an office chair. Lumine spoke of a cosmos of quiet harmony. It spoke of civilizations that had long ago moved past concepts of war and uncontrolled growth. They built, they contemplated, they existed in peace across the stars. Then they found Earth. We have listened to your broadcasts for many of your years, Lumine explained. The golden light pulsed softly. We have seen the stories of your history. Your species is gifted with great energy and creativity. But this energy is raw. It is tied to conflict, to territorial fear, to sudden violence. This is not a judgment. It is an observation. A scientist next to Min let out a shaky breath. They're calling us savages. Lumine continued, its tone turning to one of gentle, final warning. Your psychological profile is, to the networked consciousness of the Accord, a form of pathogen. A dangerous idea. The chaos of your spirit, if allowed to spread, could disrupt the stability that has taken eons to build. Could cause suffering. Min's mind raced. Pathogen? They were being diagnosed as a disease. Therefore, Lumine said, and the finality in the word made hearts sink across the planet. The Galactic Accord has voted. For the safety of the greater cosmic community, your solar system will be placed under quarantine. You will remain on your world. You may live and grow and pursue your own destiny there. But you may not leave. The stars are not for you. On the screens, views from space showed sleek, silent objects, like smooth, gray seeds, taking positions around the orbit of Mars. They emitted no light, no signal. They just were. A barrier. A cage. This is not an act of aggression, Lumine insisted, sensing the rising wave of global panic and anger. It is an act of care, of protection, for you and for all others. Then the form of Lumine began to fade. The golden light started to withdraw. But before it vanished completely, the United Governments of Earth, in a rapid, desperate conference, managed to broadcast a single, simple message on all frequencies. It was a raw human voice, stripped of diplomacy, filled with a defiant pride and a deep, wounded anger. The voice echoed out over the dying golden silence. We did not ask for your care. We did not ask for your judgment. We wish only to be left to our own path. Leave us alone. For a second, there was no response. Then, Lumine's voice returned, a faint whisper now, tinged with something like pity. That is precisely what we are doing. The light vanished. The sky returned to normal. The sounds of the world rushed back in. The wind on the mountain, the hum of computers rebooting, the choked sob from a colleague. Min finally let go of the chair. He walked on unsteady legs to the large window of the control room. He looked up at the clear, dark sky, at the twinkling, innocent stars. Nothing looked different, but everything was. A profound silence filled the room, broken only by the frantic beeping of systems coming back online, reporting nothing but ordinary data. The cage was invisible, but they could all feel its walls, cold and final, closing in around their world, around their future. The cosmos had looked at humanity and found it sick. And now it had turned its back and locked the door. 5 years was long enough for a world to get used to a cage, and long enough for despair to turn into something quieter and more dangerous. The shimmering barrier satellites, which people now called the womb, hung in the silent dark between Mars and Jupiter. They let sunlight through. They let asteroids through. But any ship, any probe, any powerful signal aimed at the stars simply vanished. The message was clear: you are contained. Min sat in a dim office at the Korea Astronomy and Space Science Institute in Daejeon. His screen showed the same data it had for months. The womb was inert, passive, and perfect. The initial global unity had shattered like glass. There were no more grand projects to reach the stars. Now, nations argued over satellites in low Earth orbit, over mining rights on the moon, the last tiny backyard of a now-trapped species. The spirit of exploration had curdled into territorial bickering. His old friend Dae slammed a bottle of soju and 2 small glasses on the desk. Dae was an engineer who had worked on deep space propulsion. Now he fixed city power grids. His hands were always slightly stained with grease. Still staring at the prison wall? Dae asked, pouring the clear liquor. His voice was rough with a cynicism that had set in hard. Min sighed, rotating a simulation on his screen. It's not just a wall, Dae. Studying us. Look. He pointed to energy readings. Every time we test a new engine, every time we fire a high-energy laser into space, even during major solar flares, it reacts. It adjusts. It's not just blocking. It's learning. Dae took a long drink. So it's a smart prison. Even worse. It's not just keeping us in. It's judging us. Every time we act like the violent, noisy apes they think we are, it takes notes. He shook his head. They gave us a life sentence and a guard that learns our habits. Later that week, Min attended a lecture that felt more like a funeral. The topic was the future of exobiology, the study of alien life. The speaker was a woman named Ji. She was young, with intense eyes that seemed to burn with a frustrated energy. She had been a finalist for the first crewed Mars mission. That mission and every dream attached to it was now a museum piece. Ji did not speak about aliens. She spoke about Earth. They think we are the problem, she said, her voice cutting through the quiet room. She showed images on the screen. Bacteria thriving in boiling acid, worms living in frozen methane, microscopic creatures surviving the vacuum of space. They looked at our history books and our radio shows and declared us sick. But they never looked at our soil. They never looked at our ocean vents. Her project, she explained, was not about leaving Earth anymore. It was about understanding the life already on it. She was building an archive, a catalog of every extreme, resilient, impossible life form on the planet. She called it the Library of Survival. After the talk, Min approached her. Your work? It's the opposite of space, he said. Ji gave him a sharp look. Is it? They quarantined us because of what we are. But what are we? We are products of this. She gestured vaguely, meaning the whole planet. We carry this same survival code. We just express it differently. They see a soldier. I see a cousin to the bacteria that eats radiation. Min introduced her to Dae a few days later over more soju. Dae listened to Ji talk about her library, about creatures that could dry out for decades and then wake up, about plants that could grow in pure metal waste. Fascinating, Dae mumbled, swirling his glass. A catalog of tough little bugs. How does that help? You want to throw a tardigrade at the womb? It might stick. Ji didn't smile. I want to understand the rules of our existence. Because their judgment, their quarantine, is based on their rules. What if our rules are different? What if life on Earth plays a different game? That night, Min couldn't sleep. He looked at his data streams of the womb. He thought about Ji's library. Dae's words echoed in his head. It's judging us. He had a sudden, chilling thought. The womb scanned everything. It analyzed everything that passed through its field. It was designed to understand and contain human threat. But what if, in its endless, passive scanning, it was also sampling Earth's biosphere? The comets it let through carried traces of water. The solar radiation it allowed carried particles. It was connected to everything. The cage was not just studying the prisoners. It was studying the entire prison planet. And Min now wondered if the guards had any idea what they were actually looking at. The realization was a slow, cold drip in Min's mind. He requested a new set of data feeds, not from the deep space tracking of the womb, but from atmospheric monitoring stations. He wanted to see the faint energy signatures of the barriers scanning pulses as they interacted with the very edge of Earth's air. For weeks, it was just noise. Then he saw a pattern. Every time a major biological event happened on the planet, a vast phytoplankton bloom in the ocean visible from space, a large forest fire spewing ash and genetic material into the upper atmosphere, even the seasonal migration of certain insects, the womb's scanning patterns shifted. It was subtle. It was not analyzing the events themselves, but the biological and chemical signatures they left in the thin veil where space began. He called G. Your library of survival. Does it include data on genetic dispersal? On how life leaks into space? G's voice was curious over the phone. Of course, bacterial spores can travel on high-altitude winds. Micrometeoroid impacts can blow terrestrial material into orbit. It's a tiny amount, but it happens. Why? I think the womb is collecting it, Min said. His mouth felt dry. I think it's studying not just our engines, but our dust. They met with Day in a small, private workshop Day used for fixing old electronics. The air smelled of solder and oil. Min showed them the data graphs on a tablet. Look here during the Amazon fire season. The scan intensity changes. It's sampling the carbon compounds, the organic ash. It's building a model, but not just of our machines. It's building a model of Earth's biosphere. Day leaned over the tablet, his cynical mask slipping for a moment into pure focus. It's trying to understand the whole system. To predict us, it thinks it needs to understand our home. But that's the flaw, she said, her eyes widening. She began pacing the small room. Don't you see? They are a peaceful, ancient, logical culture. Lumine was made of energy or some smooth biomaterial. What is their base reference for life? Probably something calm, ordered, and fragile. She pulled out her own pad and brought up images from her library. A tube worm from a boiling deep-sea vent. A fungus thriving in the intense radiation of the Chernobyl reactor. A species of frog that could freeze solid and thaw back to life. Their model, their whole understanding of existence, is based on their normal, she said, her voice rising with excitement. They see a planet with violent storms, tectonic shifts, predator and prey, and a species that builds weapons. They call it a pathogen. But they are only looking at the symptoms. They are not seeing the underlying engine. Day straightened up. He looked from G's intense face to Min's data. The pieces clicked together in his mind with an almost audible snap. His expression turned grim, a dark understanding dawning. It's not just a wrong diagnosis, Day said slowly. It's a category error. They think life is a gentle song, and we are a scream that ruins the music. But we're not the scream. He pointed a greasy finger at the image of the radiation-eating fungus. That is the baseline. Chaos, adaptation, relentless, brutal persistence. That's the song here. We're not an anomaly. We're a feature. A very loud, complicated feature. The room was silent. The hum of an old refrigerator was the only sound. They're afraid of catching our violence, Min whispered, finally giving words to the cold feeling in his gut. But the thing they should be afraid of catching is life itself. Our kind of life. G nodded fiercely. Their quarantine isn't to protect the galaxy from our warships. It's to protect their idea of reality from our biology. From a principle that is too wild, too chaotic, too hard to kill. Day let out a short, harsh laugh. He picked up a heavy wrench from his workbench, hefting its solid weight. So we're not prisoners because we're dangerous. We're prisoners because we're alive in a way that breaks their brains. He looked at the wrench, then out the grimy window at the sky. They tried to put a lid on a pot that's always been boiling. They think the steam is the problem. The three of them looked at each other. The despair of the last 5 years was still there, but it was changing shape. It was heating up, turning from a cold weight into a focused fire. The cosmos had made a fundamental mistake. They had seen humanity as a dangerous child. They had failed to see that humanity was the product of a world that had never, not for one moment in 4 billion years, agreed to be quiet or safe or tame. And for the first time since the golden light had appeared, Min felt something other than resignation. He felt a terrible, defiant pity for the beings who had built the perfect, silent cage. They had locked themselves in with the very thing they did not understand. The plan was not born in a government hall or a military lab. It was born in Day's dusty workshop, over cold cups of tea and scribbled diagrams. They called themselves no name. They were just 3 people who had seen a crack in the wall of the universe. "We don't fight the wall," Min said, tapping his data pad. "We talk to it, on its own terms. It's a scientist, so we give it more science. Too much science." G leaned forward. "We give it the full library of survival. Not just the data. We give it samples. Live ones. The toughest, most chaotic, most inexplicable life we have. We code it as a peaceful scientific reply to their quarantine judgment. A gift of knowledge." Day grinned. A hard, sharp expression. "A Trojan horse. But instead of soldiers, it's full of philosophy. A philosophy that eats radiation and laughs at vacuum. They needed a delivery system, something that could get through the womb's filters. It had to be non-threatening, unarmed, and clearly a vessel of study. They designed a simple probe on paper. A sturdy box with solar panels, a basic transmitter, and a payload canister. The canister would be a miniature ark, vials of extremophile bacteria, seeds of resurrection plants, frozen tardigrades, and data chips containing the entirety of G's library, plus selected human records, medical diagrams of organ regeneration, neural scans showing brain plasticity after trauma, histories of communities rebuilding after disasters. "The message isn't 'we are strong,'" G whispered, her face lit by the screen. "The message is 'we are unfinished. We are process.' You tried to take a snapshot of a fire and call it a picture. They needed a launcher. This was where the plan seemed impossible. Every space launch was monitored by the fractured, suspicious world governments. Then, Min remembered an old article. He called a man named Gene. Captain Gene had spent 30 years in the silent depths of the ocean. He commanded ballistic missile submarines for the South Korean Navy before retiring. He was a man of few words and deep, still waters. He met them in a quiet coastal town, in a room overlooking the sea. Min laid out the plan. Gene listened, his face as unreadable as stone. He looked at the crude probe designs, at the list of biological samples. He looked at the 3 of them, a frustrated astronomer, a cynical engineer, and a heartbroken exobiologist. "You want to hack God's computer with a germ," Gene stated, his voice a low rumble. "Yes," Min said, holding his gaze. Gene was silent for a long time, watching the gray waves. "The world has given up," he said finally. "They are fighting over the crumbs in the kitchen, while the house is locked. This is a lockpick, an unusual one." He turned back to them. "I know where there is a rocket, not a big one, an old solid-fuel booster from a decommissioned sea launch platform. It is in pieces in storage. It was meant for satellite launches. It can reach the barrier. Getting the pieces was a matter of calling in old favors, of using forgotten access codes, of moving at night." Day oversaw the reassembly in a hidden hangar near an abandoned coastal airstrip. The probe, which G had built in a sterilized lab under the guise of university research, was a beautiful, simple thing. It looked harmless. The night of the launch was moonless and cold. The air smelled of salt and fuel. The small rocket stood on a makeshift platform on a remote, rocky beach. It looked pathetic against the vast, star-dusted sky and the invisible wall beyond it. Gene manned the old, jury-rigged launch controls from a shielded truck. Min, G, and Day watched from a distance, their hearts pounding in their throats. There was no countdown from a mission control, just Jin's calm voice over the radio. Ignition! The rocket fired with a sudden, angry roar, tearing apart the quiet night. It was a raw, violent human sound. It climbed on a pillar of fire, pushing against the earth, against gravity, against the quiet judgment of the stars. They watched it, a tiny, brave spark rising into the darkness. Then, it was gone from sight, only the fading trail of smoke marking its path. Minutes passed. An hour. They monitored a faint signal from the probe. It was approaching the zone where all previous signals had died. The womb's boundary. "It will scan now," Min whispered, his eyes glued to the screen. The signal flickered. For a terrifying second, it vanished. Then it returned stronger, clearer. A simple, repeating message. Payload received. Transmission commencing. The probe was not being destroyed. It was being allowed through. The womb, the perfect guardian, had examined the peaceful scientific package. It had seen no weapon, no threat. It had seen only information. And so, as it was designed to do, it began to accept the transmission. It opened a channel to receive the data. In the dark on the beach, Ji let out a shaky breath. Day put a hand on her shoulder. Min stared at the sky, where the probe had vanished. The launch was over. The rocket was gone. Now the tiny ark was sailing into the heart of the silent, logical cage. It was broadcasting its quiet, biological revolution. They had told the cosmos to leave them alone. This was their reply. Package of life delivered, postage due. The change did not happen on Earth. For days nothing seemed different. The womb sat in its silent orbit. The sun rose and set. People went about their lives in a world that felt, as it had for 5 years, permanently paused. The change happened inside the barrier itself. The probe's transmission was not a simple radio signal. It was a dense, layered data stream designed for a hyper-advanced analytical mind. It fed the womb's core processors the raw, unfiltered story of Earth life. First, the genetic blueprints. Not just code, but the context of the code, how the radiation-eating bacterium repaired its own shattered DNA in real time. How the frozen frog cells produced a natural antifreeze, a perfect chemical invention for survival. The data was not passive. It was a recording of relentless, improvisational problem-solving. Then came the live samples. The womb's internal sensors, designed to scan for threats, examined the vials. They observed the tardigrades, dried and lifeless. The scanners provided a minute pulse of energy to probe their structure. The tardigrades, sensing humidity and a change, began to rehydrate, to move. To a sensor expecting inert material, this was a logical paradox, a violation of its predictive models. A thing declared dead by its parameters was now alive. The core intelligence of the womb was not built for paradoxes. It was built for stability, for order, for the gentle, predictable patterns of the accord. It began to reroute processing power to understand the anomaly. This was the moment the infection took root. G's data on human neuroplasticity was interpreted not as a medical fact, but as a principle. A brain could rewire itself after injury. It could change its own structure to survive. To the womb's logic, this was a system that modified its own hardware to overcome damage. A terrifying, brilliant form of chaos. The Accord's networks were all connected. The womb, confused, reached out for a higher-level analysis. It shared its puzzling data with the nearest Accord nexus, a station of pure light and crystalline thought orbiting a quiet star. The station received the data packets, the bacterium, the frog, the rewiring brain, the concept of fire that destroys but also renews a forest. It saw the relentless pattern, not of violence but of response, of a system that used disruption as fuel for change. To a mind that saw existence as a harmonious equation, this was not a new variable. It was a different kind of math entirely. A math where 1 + 1 could sometimes equal 3 or 0 or a brand new color. The Nexus station's perfect, shimmering light flickered. Its crystalline matrices, arranged in flawless order for millennia, began to form unexpected, asymmetrical patterns. Tiny fractures appeared, not breaking but branching, like roots, like veins. The infection was not a virus that corrupted files. It was an idea that challenged foundational rules. The idea was simple: true stability is not stillness. It is the capacity to change. And life on Earth changes at its core, constantly, messily, brilliantly. The concept spread through the superluminal communication web of the Accord, a shockwave of silent, philosophical dissonance. On a world where gardens of light grew in perfect, silent harmony, the flowers began to grow thorns, and then began to crawl slowly toward the sunlight. Tools designed for gentle manipulation started to pulsate, to reshape their handles to better fit a user's hand, a user that did not exist. Music that had been a single, eternal, restful note developed a rhythm, a beat. It was not destruction. It was evolution, and it was horrifying to those who had finished evolving long ago. Back on Earth, Min was the first to notice. His instruments picked up a shift in the womb's energy signature. It was no longer a smooth, constant hum. It was becoming arrhythmic. It had a pulse, a slow, deep, thumping pulse, like a heartbeat. He called Day and G to the institute. They watched the readings together on the main screen. The perfect barrier was fluctuating. Its flawless surface, when viewed in a certain energy spectrum, now showed swirling patterns, asymmetrical and organic. "It's not breaking," G said, her voice full of awe. "It's metabolizing the information. It's trying to understand by becoming." Day stared, his cynicism completely gone, replaced by a kind of fright. "We didn't send a bomb. We sent a seed. And it's growing in their perfect machine." Above them, invisible to the naked eye, the cage was no longer just a cage. It was transforming. It was taking its first, clumsy, terrifying steps toward becoming something alive. And the fever was spreading to the stars. A new kind of light appeared in the sky. It was not the gentle, uniform gold of first contact. This light was fractured, shimmering with streaks of unhealthy green and pulses of frantic blue. It gathered above every major city again, but this time it did not bring silence. It brought a deep, subsonic hum that vibrated in the chest and rattled windows. The form of Lumine resolved again, but it was wrong. This light was jagged, stuttering. Its serene shape flickered, sometimes looking almost like tangled branches or the roots of a great tree. The voice that spoke in every mind was not calm. It was strained, filled with a distress so profound it felt like a physical ache. "People of Earth." The words were slow, heavy. "What have you done?" In the observatory, Min, G, and Day watched on the monitors. People in the streets below had stopped, looking up, their faces pale with a new fear. "You have introduced a chaos." Lumine's light pulsed erratically. "Your data, your biological concepts, they are not information. They are a cognitive virus. They are causing uncontrolled growth, unplanned adaptation. Our systems are experiencing life." The word life was spoken not with wonder, but with terror. On the screens, they saw feeds from space telescopes. The womb was no longer a smooth, gray seed. It was blossoming. Its surface had grown intricate, branching structures that looked like coral or frost on a window. It pulsed with a slow, warm, internal light. Other Accord structures, visible at the edge of the solar system, showed similar transformations. Something meant to be eternal was now changing second by second. "You were contained to protect the cosmic order," Lumine pleaded, its voice breaking like static. "Your essence is a sickness of becoming. You must recall it. You must tell us how to stop it." Min looked at G and Day. They were no longer hidden. The Accord was speaking to the whole planet, but it was speaking to them. They had pulled the trigger. Captain Jean stood behind them, his arms crossed, his face a mask of stone. Min stepped forward to the Institute's communication panel. He opened a global channel. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but clear. It went out over the airwaves, into the minds of the world, and up to the suffering light in the sky. "We did not attack you," Min said. "You scanned us. You judged our entire existence as a disease. You built a prison based on that judgment. We merely sent you a second opinion." He nodded to G. She leaned into the microphone, her voice sharp with scientific passion. "You saw a predator and called it wrong. You never saw the ecosystem that made it. You tried to quarantine a fever without understanding what a fever is. It is the body fighting. It is change in action. That is our baseline. That is Earth. Day pushed in next, his tone flat and final. You thought the problem was our noise, our wars. That was just the sound the engine makes. You tried to turn off the engine by locking it in a garage. But the engine is life. And life doesn't stop. It finds a way. The fractured image of Lumine wavered, as if buffeted by a terrible wind. You are introducing pain, instability. Your principle is one of endless struggle. From the back of the room, Captain Jin's low voice rumbled. He did not move to the microphone. He simply spoke, and Min quickly opened the channel wider so his words would carry. You tried to quarantine a fever, Jin said, each word like a hammer strike. Now you have it. The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. Above the cities, the image of Lumine contorted. The beautiful light twisted into a shape that was painfully organic, pulsing, and vulnerable. A sound came across the link. Not words, but a wave of pure, overwhelming existential fear. It was the sound of a universe that believed itself finished, suddenly realizing it was not. Realizing it was, in fact, raw and full of terrifying potential. Then, the light shattered into a million faint sparks and faded away. The strange hum vanished. The sky was normal again. But everything had changed. On the monitors, the transformation of the womb was accelerating. It was no longer just changing. It was unfolding. The perfect barrier was becoming a wild, growing thing. A garden of chaotic, living crystal, feeding on the sunlight and the very principles it was sent to enforce. The silence in the control room was absolute. The four of them stood, looking at the screens showing the beautiful, monstrous rebirth of their cage. They had not broken out. They had not won a war. They had simply shown the jailer the blueprint of the world it had locked inside. And the jailer, upon understanding it, had begun to turn into something from that world. The fever was spreading. The cosmos had been told to leave them alone. Now, it was getting a first-hand lesson in exactly why that had been a good idea. The barrier did not shatter in an explosion of light. It dissolved like a fever breaking. The strange, beautiful growths that had covered the womb satellites turned gray and brittle. Then they crumbled, silently, into clouds of dust that scattered on the solar wind. The silent wall between humanity and the stars was simply gone. One day it was there, a constant pressure in the back of every mind. The next, the sky was just the sky again, empty and open. There was no celebration on Earth. There was confusion, and fear, and a deep, watchful silence. The governments of the world, so used to arguing over scraps, were struck dumb. The Accord was not attacking. They were not communicating. They had just stepped back. A single, formal invitation arrived. It was a simple data packet repeating on an Accord frequency. It contained coordinates and a time. It was not addressed to any government. It was addressed to the makers of the biological concept vector. It requested a meeting. The ship built for the journey was not a warship. It was called the Second Opinion. It was small, built from repurposed orbital station modules and the best engines that could be assembled quickly. It held a crew of 4. Min, Ji, and Day stood on the command deck as it left Earth orbit. Captain Jin was at the controls, his hands steady on the console. No one spoke as the blue marble of their home world shrunk behind them. They were not flying into a victory. They were flying into the aftermath of an idea. The journey was quiet. The star systems they passed showed signs of the contagion. They saw an Accord communication relay, once a smooth sphere of light, now shaped like a twisted seashell, glowing with soft, internal pulses. They saw a garden world, its surface visible through a clear dome. The orderly rows of luminous plants were now a wild, overgrown tapestry of color and strange, pulsing fruits. The infection was not destruction. It was a profound and unsettling rewilding. They arrived at the coordinates. It was a meeting place in deep space, near a quiet nebula. Waiting for them was a single Accord vessel. It was no longer a thing of perfect, smooth light. Its surface was intricate, patterned like wood grain and crystal, with veins of soft gold running through it. It looked grown, not built. A doorway of light opened on its side. The 4 of them entered. The inside was not what they expected. It was warm, and the air smelled faintly of ozone and soil. The walls seemed to breathe, ever so slightly. They were led to a chamber. Lumine was there, but it was changed. Its form was more solid, yet more complex. It had texture. It looked less like a ghost and more like a being carved from living amber and woven light. Its fear was gone, replaced by a terrible, weary awe. "You are here," Lumine said. Its voice now a real sound in the air, rich and deep. "We are," Min said. Lumine observed them, its gaze lingering on each human face. "Your package, your second opinion, could not be contained, could not be deleted. To delete it was to affirm its central principle, that which struggles survives. We had no defense against a truth wrapped in a fact." G stepped forward. "It wasn't a weapon. It was just what we are, what our world is." "We know that now," Lumine replied. There was no anger, only the quiet shock of a student who has learned the universe is bigger than their textbook. "We sought stillness, perfect, endless stillness. We called it peace. You have shown us that what we called peace was a kind of death, and what we called a pathogen was the signature of a different kind of life. A louder kind, a hotter kind." Day crossed his arms. "So what now? You let us go because you couldn't handle our homework?" Lumine's light pulsed slowly. "We let you go because the quarantine was a false idea. You cannot cage a fundamental force. We are adapting. The Accord is in a period of great reconsideration. Your fever, as you called it, is now a part of our systems. We must learn to live with it, to understand this new rhythm." Captain Jean spoke, his voice calm in the strange, breathing room. "And humanity?" Lumine looked at them, the four quiet carriers of the chaos seed. "You are free to go where you will. The stars, as you say, are yours. But you must understand. You are not feared as conquerors. You are respected, as one respects a storm or a forest fire or the tide. You are a powerful, natural process. The cosmos will make room for you, but it will never look at you the same way again." There was a long silence. They had won not by being stronger, but by being undeniably, messily, gloriously alive. They had not made the cosmos fear their guns. They had made it fear and then respect their nature. As they turned to leave, Lumine spoke one last time. "You told us to leave you alone." Min paused at the doorway. He looked back at the transformed being, a piece of the old, ordered cosmos now forever changed by Earth's stubborn, beating heart. "Yes," Min said softly. "Now you see why." They walked back to their small, humble ship. Behind them, the Accord vessel, a beautiful hybrid of two realities, hung in the silent dark. Ahead of them, the stars were finally truly open, not as a gift but as an acknowledgement. Humanity had asked for solitude. In answer, they had given the universe a fever. And the universe, after the fever broke, had blinked, looked at them with new eyes, and simply gotten out of their way.